Good morning, and welcome to the Houston Methodist Town Hall conversation on COVID-19. My name is Dr. Alan Lumsden. I'm the Medical Director for the Houston Methodist DeBakey Heart and Vascular Center and the Chairman of the Department of Cardiovascular Surgery. Our center is named perhaps after one of the greatest cardiovascular surgeons that ever existed, Dr. DeBakey, both an innovator, an educator, and a great surgeon. And he practiced here at Houston Methodist for over 60 years. That's remarkable. We're in the Houston Methodist DeBakey Cardiovascular Education Studios. And this is part of our DeBakey Cardiovascular Education program. Here we actually provide lectures and hands-on experiences for many surgeons and cardiologists, medical students, and company representatives around the world. We host a lot of this content on our YouTube channel. This month we will hit probably 3 million views and 25,000 subscribers. About 3.5 weeks ago, we turned all the programming over into focus on COVID. And there are 13 different lectures on COVID on that site for you to look at your leisure. Nearly 50,000 people have looked at those, and it helps us basically get the name of Methodist as well as providing quality education. Today, we bring to you some of the foremost leaders here in Methodist and around the world in COVID who are going to explain to you some of the activities that are going on here. Before I introduce our hosts, Dr. Marc Boom and Dr. Dirk Sossman, I want really to thank the nearly 500 guests who are joining us by live stream today. And those guests include members of the Society for Leading Medicine, members of the President's Leadership Council, members of our Premier Care and Platinum programs, and lead benefactors, and the many other friends of Houston Methodist. Welcome. Thank you for your support, and thank you for being with us today. It really is my privilege to introduce two people I've worked with for a long time, two of my bosses, two Houston Methodist executives who are going to lead this discussion. So in a little bit, we'll hear from Dr. Dirk Sossman, who's the president of the Houston Methodist Academic Institute. But to kick it off today for us, please welcome Dr. Marc Boom, president and CEO of Houston Methodist. Marc.
Thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see everyone virtually, and really appreciate all of you taking time out of your busy days to spend some time with us today to learn about COVID. I can't express strongly enough the appreciation I have, our team has, for the support we have felt. It is absolutely palpable throughout the community. All of the things that you have done to just encourage and send notes and give food to frontline staff and many other things, because really the people at the front lines are heroes in my mind, and they're doing an absolutely beautiful job caring for our community during a very difficult time. Now I'm going to give you an overview of some of where things stand right now. I'm going to move pretty quickly because we want to really spend a lot of time today with our experts. And so let me run on through a few things about COVID, but then especially around what's happening here in our city and a little bit around where things go next, which was a very common question, obviously, that everybody's asking. So as we talk about COVID, we've talked about this over and over again, but this is one of the graphics I like that really explains why this has been so different. It's much more contagious than the flu. No one is immune, and so everybody is susceptible to becoming infected. Now we're seeing more and more, in fact, even higher percentages of people who may have asymptomatic infections, which on one hand means mortality rates and things are lower than we thought, but on the other hand means this is even more spreadable, many times unintentionally and unknowingly. And then finally, it latches on to specific receptors in the lung and causes very severe pneumonia in a percentage of the population. We don't fully understand why some people get that more than others, but that's really where we're seeing significant illness and death. What we're seeing in Houston, and you can see it starting to show in these data, this is a curve of the greater Houston area. What we're seeing is that it's starting to level off. We're seeing a lower increase each day in the number of cases. Across the hospital systems, the percentage change in cumulative cases that we're seeing is slowing down, and across some of the hospital systems, and I'll show you some data including Houston Methodist, we've even seen a little bit lower data, which is highly encouraging and suggests that we are nearing the peak. We're not at the peak yet, but we are nearing the peak as a community, probably consistent with many of the models, which I'll talk about in a second. You've heard this ad nauseum about flattening the curve, but the reason I put it back up here is because right now we're at a very critical point. Even though we're leveling off, even though the curve is almost at peak, Actually, if you think about it, that's the time where there are more people in the community than at any other time prior to this with this disease. And so it is critically important that we maintain the social distancing and other activities that people have been focused on. And many of you have seen graphics like this, but because of the statistics around how easily spread this disease is, one person can ultimately infect well over 400 people and then exploding from that in a very short period of time. And so it remains paramount that everybody focus on social distancing and hand hygiene and all of the other things that we've been talking about. This is our experience at Houston Methodist. And I will tell you, we're doing some virtual high fives and happiness in our command center right now looking at this curve. The blue line is total patients in a hospital bed somewhere within Houston Methodist. The line we especially look at is the yellow gold line, because that is a line that looks at ICU bed utilization, which for everyone is the biggest pinch point. And so as you can see, this has leveled off and even come down over the last few days. It was rapidly increasing actually as recently as Friday, where we had a very large surge, but then come Saturday and on, it has been leveling off. So we're very pleased to see this. Now let me say, across the Texas Medical Center, this is not uniformly experienced. Everybody's been on a little bit different curve. So I do not believe we are at peak yet as a community, but the signs are saying that we are getting close. And so we are very cautiously optimistic about that. Much modeling has been done. This is some of the modeling done by UT School of Public Health. And whereas a couple weeks ago at the end of March, it was showing a peak of around 62,000 cumulative cases and a total of over 100,000 across the greater Houston area, the modeling as of this Monday was about half of that. Much other modeling has been done. Many of you have seen the IHME site, which comes out of the University of Washington. This is what it looked like just a couple weeks ago, which was a pretty significant curve and a peak that would actually be significantly higher than the ICU beds that were available across the state. This is what it looks like today. So all of these are evidence that all the social distancing, all the policies that were put in place have worked. And so all the sacrifices that everyone is making, which are significant obviously, have worked in leveling off this curve, which is critically important for the health of Houstonians and the health of Americans. If you look then at some of the modeling in terms of capacity that we've done across the Texas Medical Center, we've looked at what does this look like if it makes a 1% prevalence across the community, 2% or 15% in a completely uncontrolled fashion, which no doubt is at least what would have happened without any social distancing put in place. It's looking like we're going to come in closer to the 1%, which is really fantastic news. We had significant doubt when we watched the curves a couple weeks ago about that. We were tracking right on with the Lombardy region of Italy as recently as 2 weeks ago, but what we've watched is us tail off of that and start to level off more recently, which is obviously really good news. So across all of the Texas Medical Center institutions, and this slide, if you want to see it, just go to the TMC site. It's published every single morning along with about 5 other slides about capacity across the Texas Medical Center hospitals. But the bottom line is we have about 1,500 beds at normal capacity of ICU across the Texas Medical Center, which pretty evenly matches the need if we had a full 1% with some of the higher end, cautious and conservative numbers in terms of patients needing ICU care. We also have the ability across the Texas Medical Center institutions to more than double those ICU beds as needed. At Houston Methodist, we took a look at very similar data, and I'm not going to go into great detail with this because thankfully it does look like we're peaking out, although frankly if we have a second curve, I'm concerned we may need this still. But basically we have between 300 and 320 operating beds for adults in ICU capacity on any given day at normal. And we've not had to use all of those for COVID, thankfully. We can surge that in different stages with different techniques across, very creative techniques across the institution and different staffing levels, all the way up to probably 750 to 800 beds. Quite frankly, that's a scenario I never ever want to see, nor does Dr. Masood, who you'll hear from soon, or any of the rest of us. And so all this work around social distancing and the sacrifices made have been to prevent the need for things like that. So really then the question on everybody's mind, and a lot of the questions that were sent to us were, where is this going? And of course, none of us have a crystal ball. The models are models, and by definition, every single model is wrong. period. It's like trying to predict a hurricane. We know that farther out we can predict a larger cone of uncertainty, and then as it gets closer, we can predict it with more accuracy, but we've all been there when it veers at the last second, either the wrong way or the right way, even in spite of all of those models. The difference here is we can actually control, are we getting hit by a category 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and that's what we're seeing now, is I think we've been able to keep the category we got hit by a lot lower by the sacrifices that were made, the quick decisions that were made. All you have to do is look at New York City. There is absolutely every reason to believe that could have happened here. We could have seen those same kind of data. We're looking at deaths across the community, in the 120, 140 range, somewhere in that range right now. You're looking at 10, 11,000 deaths across New York. And New York City's population is not all that much higher than Houston, and so we could have seen that. This is a really nice piece actually done by Scott Gottlieb and colleagues, Mark McClellan. Those are two very familiar names. Scott Gottlieb was the FDA commissioner up until about a year ago. He's a Republican. This is a conservative-leaning think tank that looked at, how do we turn things back on? How do we move forward? And it's actually a very thoughtful piece, and one I'd commend to you. You just Google what you see here on the screen. You'll find it in a couple of seconds. And really, they talk about 4 phases, and we are solidly in phase 1 right now, which is, we were all behind the 8 ball worldwide. We need to slow the spread, and that's all the things that have been done around social distancing. Phase 2 is how do you reopen gradually? Phase 3 then is getting fully established protection, which ultimately is a vaccine or a definitive therapy. And then phase 4, how do we prepare for the next pandemic? The big thing to focus on now is, as we're approaching the time where we may move from phase 1 to phase 2, is how do we make those decisions? And the piece is very, very thoughtful and really has 4 triggers to look at. And I'm in agreement with these triggers. Now, let me tell you, they are consensus-based. None of us have been through this. Nowhere in the world has truly been through this to where we can look at the data. And there's reason for concern with some of the things we're seeing out there in Singapore, as many people have probably seen, where we've used them as a model of how to handle this on the front end. They're now actually seeing a significant increase in cases and having to put significant restrictions in place as they've opened up the economy. And so we have to be very cautious and thoughtful and incremental in what we do. These recommendations suggest a 14-day period of sustained decreases in cases. That is based on the transmissibility of the virus. It's a theoretical timeline. Nobody knows that that's exactly right, but it certainly seems consistent. We've not seen that yet in Houston. Maybe we're almost at the point where we're going to start seeing the beginning of those 14 days. And so I do believe we're at least 14 days, probably even longer out till we look to release some of the restrictions. And obviously places like New York City and some others are much farther out than that. Number 2 is hospitals in the state being safely able to care for all patients. Number 3 is having adequate testing capacity. And number 4 is having the monitoring, really a significant workforce of public health to monitor the population. So let me touch on one item here, and then I'm going to wrap things up very quickly after a couple more slides. And that's, where are we on testing? Texas is second to last in the country right now. Now, let me caution you, some of the data there, and you can see those at the top of the list. New York and Louisiana are 2 of those at the top of the list. In large part, tests were surged to places that had surges, so there's a little bit of a circular piece to that. And with Texas, particularly in rural areas not having been so hard hit, tests from the federal government have not been distributed nearly at the same rate. So there's a little bit of that creeping into the data, but clearly as a state we have to figure out how to test way more. Put that in perspective, in the greater Houston area, Houston Methodist alone is probably responsible for a testing rate of probably 1,100, 1,200 per million people in our city alone, which is about 20% of that. And it should be much less than that, frankly. That is our adult market share, but there's so many other testing venues, and so we have a lot of work to do to keep pushing that. So really, when you look at where we are, I think the second bullet point, we're actually there as we've seen this start to crest in the hospitals, as we've sorted out and we've gotten PPE online and have visibility into our personal protective equipment as we look at ICU capacity, staffing, et cetera. Now, if we have a second surge because we release things too fast, that's a whole different story, but at least with a cautious, gradual release of restrictions, we're there. But really the other 3, we're not there yet. And so I urge patience. It's tough because we're starting to see this crest in human nature as we all want to get out to normal, but it's just not realistic. And then finally, I want to wrap up by thanking all of you and thanking all of our frontline caregivers. This is a graphic I just love, starting with some of the first responders and going to nurses and scientists and physicians who truly are the heroes of this story and doing a magnificent job. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up, and I'd like to actually introduce two guests we have here. We're going to spend about 10 minutes with each of our guests here, and then we've got a couple other guests that will come in, and Dr. Sossman will coordinate some of the questions of those guests. So the first of those individuals is Dr. Faisal Masood. Faisal, welcome. I'm glad to have you here.
Good morning, Mark. I'm pleased to be here.
Faisal, Dr. Masood is the head of critical care across all of Houston Methodist. Actually, he's been with us many, many years. He and I go way back probably 20 years, but recently promoted to cover the entire system. Actually, he's been working on virtual ICU and many other great things that have come in very handy during this epidemic and pandemic. He's also at the front lines personally caring for patients every single day. So Dr. Masood, why don't you fill us in for a few moments about some of the questions we've been hearing and some of your activities and the things that y'all have been doing.
Well, thank you, Mark, Dr. Boom, for allowing me this opportunity to reach out and talk to our audience and our supporters. Before I go, I was asked to remind the audience that if you have a question, text DeBakey to 37607 and respond at pollev.com/DeBakey. So with that being said, this has been an event of a lifetime. But what I can tell you that critical care specialists have been prepared for this all of their professional care. So we have been ready. At Houston Methodist, when all of this started to take place, we focused on making dedicated COVID ICUs. What we did was that we pulled up all of our critical care specialists from different ICU, focused them on our dedicated COVID ICU because this is a lot of unknown. We were getting a lot of sick people. We started with one intensive care unit in our AHMH main campus in which we were taking COVID critically ill patient across the system. However, because of increasing volume, we end up opening up 3 ICUs, and we have right now 3 intensive care units dedicated to COVID patients across our system. But the expertise is now developed so much good that pretty much every hospital in our system is taking care of COVID patient. Now, if they need a lot more complex care, they kind of bring up a patient and we're happy to manage that. As Dr. Boom mentioned, we've been on this journey for virtual ICU for 4 years, and we just happened to launch it in the preliminary phase in January, and lo and behold, with this coming on board, we deployed all the resources, and our virtual ICU is supporting in our installed ICUs 24/7, and that's what making a big impact. We basically, I've been in collaboration with my Texas Medical Center leadership colleagues across the whole system. We talk, we learn, we share. And I can tell you that at Houston Methodist Hospital System, we have been taking care of the most number of patients across our own Texas Medical Center in the city. And I'm proud to that our team of critical care specialists and nurses and everybody else, they're all Gardner partner and delivering excellent care for some of those patients. Now our capacity start to increase as the patient numbers start to go up and up. And at one page, as you heard from Dr. Boom, we were on a lot more surge, but directions coming from Dr. Phillips and Dr. Boom and Dr. Sossman, we kind of added almost very quickly about 150 plus ICU beds, and we dedicated a lot of those patients and start taking care of them. On that, we still had ICU patients who were not COVID. So our colleagues, the cardiologists, the surgeon, the cardiac surgeon, and everybody chipped in, and they are actually helping us taking care of those patients tremendously. Now, everybody asks that, what is the best treatment, but what is the best way to do it is also. You have to recognize that this is a 6-month-old disease. Pretty much every therapy is all experimental. All the trial that you're seeing, which we are doing a lot of whether in partnership with our colleagues in infectious disease, in RI, in all of the fields, these are all experiment therapies. So we, our critical care, my friends and colleagues and nurses and physicians and RT, along with their partners, we focus on excellence of what we know best. how we can integrate all the knowledge. Our team start developing more and more protocol, not only develop, but we share that also with a lot of people. And we kept on updating because this was learned knowledge. Nobody knew what exactly how to do it, but I can tell you that with all of this learned knowledge, we have been successfully able to manage, escalate, and share across all of our system, and actually for our colleagues also. With that process, we are able to manage this patient and integrate our research protocol. Now, you have to recognize these patients, the main disease is affecting their lungs, and they get into trouble with breathing, and they end up in the ICUs. Quite a few of them, go up on the ventilator, and I'm sure you've heard from media and everybody about ventilator shortage and all this stuff. We as an institution learned a lot from New York, New Jersey, Italy, Wuhan, and we modified the protocol, modified our processes, and we are able to get people off the ventilator. Initially, it used to be, an infrequent event. I can tell you right now, it's becoming a norm. So it's not an anomaly, but it is becoming a norm because our teams are really doing an excellent job to kind of do that. The other thing which I can give you is, there's a talk about ventilator shortage concern and everything. We have a good capacity, and under Dr. Booms and Dr. Phillips' direction, we looked at all the options. What if in the mild, moderate, or pandemic model, we develop all the capacity and we are ready to take care whether this right now or even there's a second surge. We are right now, I can give you an example, out of our 459 capacity, we have 64 COVID patients on ventilator, and we have seen this number go down gradually because we are taking them off ventilator. Now, if you talk about leading medicine, our focus has been how can we avoid putting these patients on ventilator to begin with. And we have got on support with Dr. Sassman and our respiratory therapist department. We have devices and protocol with our pulmonary colleagues to prevent putting these patients on ventilator. And I think that would be a better way and strategy. People have asked that how long do they stay in ICU? And again, what we've seen is on the average, anywhere from 5 to 15 days, they are kind of staying in the ICUs. And we are because these are complex, and we want to make sure that they are safe and stable before they leave the ICU. You may also have seen our high infectious disease unit. That's a very focused area in which we are able to send some of our patients who are not very critically ill, but they are needing long-term care. From our intensive care unit, we have been regularly discharging patients outside the ICU, and they're getting better. And I think part of this is not only the care we provide, but all the therapies which you'll hear today later on. I think they're making an impact. I think everything is putting in a piece and all this stuff. What the numbers came from all across was, people are dying when they go to ICU. When they go to any intensive care, there's a lot of death and everything. I can tell you right now, our mortality numbers all across the Houston Methodist Hospital is fabulous. They have very low mortality compared to pretty much a lot of places around the country. And I think it's focused on early learning, early intervention, dedicated teams, a lot of research, a lot of innovation from that standpoint. Another point is what we call is our patient requiring ECMO or extracorporeal. We had patients 11. We're able to come off 7 of them and get them better. Now, what I can share with you is that, I'd like to share a couple of things which we've been innovative, and to kind of show you how our teams and nurses and everybody do that. Let me go with the slide. All right. Okay. So this on the left-hand side is our critical care team, which is basically taking a look in the patient's lungs. And as you can see, everybody's a top-notch PPE. Everybody's focused on all the stuff in very complex patient. On the right side is our electronic ICU, virtual ICU, in which there's a hub people are seeing with cameras and monitors and assisting the bedside team. This is all about innovation. This is an intubation box which we developed with our support with my colleagues, Dr. Stephen Shu and Firas, whom you'll meet also. This allows people to put the breathing tube in with filter and prevent the healthcare team. And this is a model which has been deployed to our intensive care unit, ED, and we have a whole backlog of people who want this. We're making as fast as we can along with support of Dr. Sassman, Trevor Bird, and everybody. I think that's what is about sharing knowledge. We put the designs and everything also all across for others to share. This is another innovation piece which allows the nurses to provide best care. My focus and my responsibility really is to my healthcare team and my patients. I want to make sure they're well protected. Before, I will go that not only that we have done a lot of this innovative process, but we've shared all across. We've shared our protocols. Our faculty has been on worldwide audience, teaching, ground webinars, town hall. I think that's what it is. Before I close, I'd like to kind of focus on, at the end of the day, this institution is about institution with a hospital with a soul and our eye care values. And I'm going to read you with permission from one of our members who shared this from a patient and their family, not patient, but their family member. And I'd like you to pay attention. This is from actually a nurse whose loved one was in our ICU, in which our virtual ICU was helping. Thank you and all of the board for making the investment to convert ICUs to a virtual format. This has been a godsend. The doctors and nurses get to see and talk to the patients without going into the room. I'm sure this was the original intent, but God had another intent. Patients would have a easy way to see family. That is the best benefit of technology. During these times, the family can visit and see their loved ones when they are otherwise would not be able to do so. They can see what is going on and how they are being cared for. I have friends in other hospitals who cannot make these visits, and patients and the families are interacting more. This is who we are. This is what it's all about. And so this is, I wanted to share you, which was shared with family. Before I finish, I'd like to say that I'm honored, humble, and thankful to all the critical care teams. Doctors, they're a world-class team. Doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, NPs, housekeeping, PCAs, IT, supply chain, administration. They've done an unbelievable job. I could not have imagined this all happening 3 months ago. But now I'm honored and humbled to say this critical care team has delivered world-class care. And with that, I'm going to defer back to Dr. Boom.
Thank you, Faisal. I very much appreciate that, and thank you for the wonderful work of you and your team and your colleagues and everyone else. I'd like to introduce Firas Zabana today, who is our Director of Infection Prevention and Control. Firas actually has been the one working to keep all of us safe, and I'd like you to cover a couple of topics that are common. We get asked a lot about how are we doing on PPE, personal protective equipment, which of course is something you've been right in the mix of in terms of how do we use it, how do we preserve it, et cetera. And cover some of the things people might want to think about personally, as in should they be wearing masks outside in the community, what kinds of masks, some questions along those lines. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Boom, for this opportunity. My name is Firas Zabani. I'm the Director of System Infection Prevention and Control at Houston Methodist. It is my honor to be working here, I have to tell you. My department provides oversight for the infection prevention and control program here across the Houston Methodist system. Part of our job is to monitor emerging infectious diseases across the world. And of course, COVID-19 has been on the radar for a little while now. So it is our job to monitor it, provide recommendations to leadership, and also once the threat becomes real, is to provide strategies for mitigation. I just want to share with you some of the innovation that we've been working on here at Houston Methodist. One of the things that my departments do is the training for the healthcare providers, whether be it train the trainer or in-person training. We also provide learning tools, tip sheets, and videos, visual tools in terms of posters and reminders for our staff when they are actually working on the units. But one of the most important things that has been critical for us here is innovation and reducing the reliance on disposable personal protective equipment, otherwise known as PPE. If you look on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the hierarchy of controls that the CDC recommends for preventing infections from spreading in an organization. And one of them is to eliminate it. Well, we are working on eliminating COVID right now. The other one is substituting it. Well, we can't really substitute it at this point, but we can also implement engineering controls. And for some of the patients that are on aerosolizing treatments or continuous aerosolizing procedures, we place those patients in negative pressure rooms, and the air is very well controlled in that area. Administrative controls is when we change the workflow of the healthcare provider, and also the PPE. And as you can see, the PPE is on the bottom of the list. Everything else has to be implemented before we even implement PPE. Here are some of the things that we've implemented here. Is how do we stretch our inventory of N95 masks? As many of you probably know, and you've heard in the media, that the PPEs are in short supply, and that's because of multiple factors. One of them being that the manufacturers are closed in China. They're just now coming back online, but also the demand of the PPE has never been higher. So how do we stretch our inventory to make sure that we are ready for the long run? One of them is to try to reprocess N95 masks. I would never have imagined this would be possible. However, when we started testing our N95 masks, either by steam sterilization or by UV light disinfection, what we discovered is there are certain masks that we can actually reprocess and use time and time again. One of the processes that has actually been approved by FDA right now is the hydrogen peroxide disinfection. And we have a lot of those machines here at Houston Methodist in all of our facilities. So we are implementing a program to be able to reprocess N95 masks that are not damaged and not soiled for up to 10 times. Can you imagine how long that would stretch our inventory for N95 masks and make us ready for the long run, just in case that this pandemic goes on for a little while longer? But there are also other innovations that we are trying to implement. Dr. Masood talked about this in particular. This is a personal protective pod that we developed here at Houston Methodist. And we accommodate it for the height of the person by allowing the port to be oval. This way the person can actually move their arms up and down. As you can see, Becca here is able to even hang an IV bag for a patient. And that will prevent us from having to put on all kinds of PPE and also conserve on our PPE usage by going into this pod and going into the room. So these are the sort of innovations that we are implementing. One more is the testing pod. When you are behind a plexiglass box, you don't need to put anything except for a glove or gloves to be able to collect the sample. Right now, for anybody that is collecting samples, of course, they have to put on the gowns, they have to put on either the N95 mask or the surgical mask, a reusable face shield, the gloves, and so on. This will allow us to conserve also on our PPE. And just talk to you about some future innovations that we are working on right now. We are working on modifying the box that Dr. Masood spoke about very eloquently, is the intubation box. We are trying to modify something now that we are in collaboration with InMed, the Texas A&M Engineering Department, to develop a box that we can put over an OB patient that is delivering, and that OB patient might be actually COVID positive, so that when they are breathing and panting, that the aerosols are not coming out and possibly infecting somebody else. N95 fit testing app, we're working with InMed on this as well. And actually it's taking a selfie and letting you know what type of mask you can actually get fit tested for. And rather than get fit tested for several different type of masks until you actually achieve fit testing, we're able to take a selfie and provide you with the type of mask that will more than likely pass fit testing. We're looking at a neonatal ICU intubation box. This is something that we are trialing at our OB department at the Woodlands, and also modifying the aerosol containment device that Dr. Masood spoke about to implement it in pathology, in the OR, and in the cath lab. Now, I want to address one question that keeps coming up from time to time. Do we have enough PPE? And the simple answer to that right now is yes. We are short on at one of the most PPEs that we are short on is probably the isolation gowns. However, this is why we talked about the isolation pod and so on, just to make sure that we are conserving. We're also looking at other ways that we can conserve on isolation gowns, and that will be trialed here at Houston Methodist in the short run. We just received isolation gowns yesterday. They will be hitting our dock today, and we hope that we can distribute those gowns very quickly.
But for us, just to
yes,
clarify that, short means we have a shorter supply in sight, not that we don't have them in place.
No.
It's just that we have 40, 50 days on some of the other items. We're about 10, 11 days on the gowns right now. So.
Correct. That's exactly what it means. And with the supplies that we just received today, that will stretch our supplies even longer. But we have ways that we can conserve further, and we'll be talking about that in the near future.
So if you could answer the one more question for us, which is about home masking and community masking, and then we'll move on to our next segment.
Absolutely. So many of you have asked about masks and masks for all. The thought behind that is that if everybody is masked, we can slow down the spread of the infection via respiratory droplets. But also remember that this particular virus is also transmitted by contact. So even if you are masked, you have to be really careful when you are doing hand hygiene before touching your mask or touching your face, so that you are not actually inoculating your face with the viral particles that could be living on or that could be dormant on some surfaces.
Great. Well, thank you for us.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate that, and appreciate both of you, all of our colleagues. You all are doing spectacular work, and I just want to thank both of you from the bottom of my heart. These are two individuals who I can tell you, there's not a moment I don't see them around if I go looking for them. They are here constantly. So thank you, both.
Thank you.
Now we're going to be switching over to Dr. Saussman, who is going to be speaking with a couple of our other experts. And in the meantime, we'd like to hear the voice of a patient who will tell her story of COVID-19.
Dear Dr. Boom, I want to tell you what your personal help has meant to me. I was diagnosed with the COVID-19 virus on March 23rd and was sent to medical ICU at Houston Methodist Hospital with bilateral pneumonia. Later, I was transferred to the main building for continued isolation and recovery. The isolation was so frightening, but the nurses treated me with the greatest of kindness and were very consoling. I'm truly thankful for a wonderful man who works with the Methodist Food Service. This dear man kept sending me the only thing I wanted to eat, mashed potatoes and, quote, chicken gravy. I received them every time I asked and at every hour I asked. It was life-sustaining life at the most basic level. Now that I'm home, I'm becoming aware of the waves and waves of people all over the world who are where I was 2 weeks ago. So many have died. I did not. I don't know why I survived COVID-19, and so many have not. But several positive factors came into play when the Kirby Methodist Emergency Care Center allowed me to be tested for COVID-19, even though the low-grade fever I'd been running for the prior 8 days was normal, and my chest x-ray was normal. My internist called 2 days later to report that my COVID test was positive and that I should go back to the Kirby Methodist ER immediately. My husband and I were stunned. Not once had we thought I might be infected with the virus. We had been self-isolating and doing everything we were told to do. At that early stage, we were completely unaware of any of the symptoms of the virus. At the ER, I was given fluids for dehydration and told that the CAT scan of my lungs revealed bilateral pneumonia and I was being transferred immediately to Houston Methodist Hospital. I said goodbye to my husband and was sent by ambulance as one of the first few patients to arrive with COVID-19. My excellent care continued at the hospital by the most loving of nurses, just as it had been in the ER. The next morning, I was asked to join 399 other participants in the remdesivir study. I was blessed to participate in those trials, and I believe the drug may have had a life-saving effect on my illness. I never, ever take these things for granted. I believe God acted for a reason through the excellent and rapid care I received from Houston Methodist Hospital, and I will not waste God's provisions. I will do anything I can do to help during this crisis. I'm now convalescing at home, but still struggle with fatigue from the pneumonia and the virus. I have a follow-up appointment with one of the Methodist pulmonologists to whom you referred me. She ordered oxygen to use as needed and an inhaler that are very much helping my breathing. I cannot thank you and Houston Methodist Hospital enough for the wonderful care that I believe saved my life. May God continue to bless you, the doctors, and every employee of our wonderful Houston Methodist Hospital. I'm holding all of you in my prayers. With great appreciation, Nikki Richnow.
Welcome back to the Houston Methodist Town Hall about the COVID-19 problem. This segment is going to talk about research that's going on at Houston Methodist to try to combat this terrible disease. As you know, just a few months ago, no one knew anything about this. And so research is a critical part of our response to the COVID-19 disease. In a moment, we'll hear from my two co-panelists, Dr. Chang and Dr. Musser, both experts in their own areas. And please remember that you can submit your questions by texting DeBakey to 37607 or online pollev.com/DeBakey. So I'll give you a brief overview about the research landscape in COVID-19, and then we'll hear in greater depth from Dr. Chang and Dr. Musser. When we're talking about the control of infectious diseases, we really are talking about a three-legged stool that rests on a foundation of testing, treatment, and vaccination. Time doesn't permit us to talk in depth about all these, so we'll focus mostly on treatment, although Dr. Musser will refer to some issues about testing, which, as Dr. Boom pointed out, is critical to the reopening of society. This slide is not something that there's going to be a quiz on at the end of the hour, and it looks rather complicated, but it's actually an example of a for biological processes, very simple organismal life cycle. The SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes the disease COVID-19 basically hijacks the machinery of your cells, and it does this in a very sneaky way. It attaches to the cell to some receptors that the cell normally uses for other things. It folds itself up in the cell membrane, and that's how it sneaks into the cell. Then it unzips itself, puts its RNA out into the cytoplasm of the cell, does some modifications to it with a couple of very simple enzymes, and then starts copying its RNA, making copies of itself and instructing the cell's machinery to make its proteins, make its RNA. Once enough of these have been made, it zips itself back up again and escapes from the cell into the intercellular space, where it is free to infect other cells, but it has made many, many copies of itself, and that's how it spreads. The COVID-19 virus can be treated with drugs that interfere with that process that I just showed you. It can also be treated with antibodies, and these are antibodies that your own body makes, or antibodies that you obtain from the generous donation of plasma from someone who has recovered from COVID-19. And that's the convalescent plasma treatment that has been so much in the news lately. There are other ways to use antibodies to attack this virus, monoclonal antibodies and immune globulin, and we can talk about those as well. What's going on at Houston Methodist in terms of treatment trials and research? The two that are farthest advanced, number one, the convalescent plasma infusion, where we've treated, and actually these slides are already out of date, we've treated 30 patients now. The work is going quite well. Patients are tolerating the infusions extremely well. And we're looking now at potential for sharing this methodology with other hospitals and other patients in the Texas Medical Center, collaborating with a multi-center trial with the Mayo Clinic, and we hope to move this treatment down the severity spectrum to start treating patients who are less severely affected by the illness. Secondly, an antiviral drug, remdesivir, has also been in the news quite a bit lately. This is a drug that interferes with the machinery that copies the virus's RNA while it's inside the cell. We have been part of a very large trial sponsored by Gilead, who make this molecule. We've treated 40 severely ill patients thus far, and there's also another arm of the study for moderately ill patients, and we've treated 6 patients on that arm. But there is a lot in the pipeline. We're looking at bioengineered antibodies. This is something Dr. Musser is working on. You'll hear from Dr. Chang about the treatment of cytokine release syndrome, also known as cytokine storm. There are cellular therapies as well as antibody therapies and other treatments for this very, very devastating problem that results from an overreaction of the body's immune system to the viral infection. Doesn't happen in everybody, but when it does happen, it can certainly be fatal, and it's a very, very feared complication. To the question of are we doing anything with the hydroxychloroquine drug that has been also so much in the news in the presidential press conferences and other places, we have a protocol under development not for hospitalized patients but for outpatients who are at high risk of severe illness. And that is people in the older age groups, males more than females, and people who have what's called a comorbidity or a pre-existing disease. Heart disease, obesity, diabetes, asthma, obstructive pulmonary disease, and so forth. We're going to be looking at this agent to see if it's possible to modify the course of disease, keep people out of the hospital, and make the illness less severe. One of our laboratories, led by Dr. Cook, is working with a Gene One Life Sciences on an RNA vaccine. And the hospital and the academic institute are doing surveillance testing of healthcare workers and collaborating with other institutions in the Texas Medical Center on this. So my two co-panelists are Dr. Jenny Chang, the Herman Chair in Cancer Research and Director of the Houston Methodist Cancer Center, and Dr. James Musser, the Fondren Presidential Distinguished Chair in the Research Institute and chair of the Department of Pathology and Genomic Medicine. We'll start with Dr. Chang. And Dr. Chang, I have to first ask you, what is a cancer doctor doing on a panel about a viral epidemic?
Thank you, Dr. Sussman, and thank you for putting me on the spot. I think that this is a very interesting time, and I must say that I'm extremely humbled to be able to be a small part of a team that may be contributing to this pandemic that we see in front of us. And just to acknowledge some of the members of the team, a most motley group of people that you would not imagine to be involved in a viral epidemic. You have a huge team of hematologists and BMT transplanters. Obviously, infectious diseases, critical care, from whom you've heard from Faisal Masood and Deepa Gota, and the solid transplant group led by Osama Gaber and Howard Huang. So this is a very interesting phenomenon that we would like to discuss a little bit about. So why is a cancer doctor on this panel, and what relevance does cancer have to do with a viral infection? Well, one of the first things that Houston Methodist is one of the major research programs is in immunology. And we are one of the 50 centers in the United States that are able to do bone marrow transplant and a treatment called CAR T-cell therapy. Now, CAR T-cell therapy for cancer is very unusual. What we do is we take the white cells, the T cells from patients, we manipulate it, and we put it back into the patient. And for certain cancers, especially blood cancers, it works very, very, very well. But you may have a really weird reaction to these CAR T cells in some patients. And this is called what we call the cytokine storm or cytokine release syndrome, where now the T cell, which has been activated and changed, re-injected into the patient, goes berserk. It actually goes into a hyper revved up state. So instead of doing its job in killing cancer or viruses, the immune system is hijacked and actually becomes hyper-inflamed, and this leads to the stage 2 and stage 3 of what we call the cytokine release syndrome. So it opens the floodgates where your own immune system has revved up so much that it overcompensates for the viral or the cancer and basically begins to release a storm of soluble factors like cytokines that results in organ damage. So the cytokine storm, which is an overreaction either to something man-made, which is CAR T-cell, or to a virus, which is usually novel, results in a whole cascade, a literal cascade of phenomena resulting in clotting disorders, in shock, in lung injury, in cell death, immune paralysis, and renal failure. This is what eventually, in very severe COVID patients, is what is the cause of their demise. And so the cytokine storm is an overreaction, a hyperinflammation of what is initially a good thing, an immune response to this. So why does this occur in viral infections? We know it occurs in COVID-19, we know it occurred in the original SARS, in dengue fever, and sometimes in influenza patients. And especially for COVID-19, which is a novel virus. So we do not have what we call herd immunity. Our body has not learned how to actually respond to this. And sometimes we over-respond to this in the cytokine release syndrome or cytokine storm. So we convened, it was a very interesting thing. So when the disease was first being published from reports from Wuhan and Italy, our group, basically in the beginning of March, recognized that this is very, very similar to what we see with the CAR T-cell therapy. And we convened the group in mid-March, way before our actual, when the first few patients were coming through from Houston Methodist. And this group basically, there was not very little in the literature about this, and we basically met every day to figure out what was happening here. It was called adapt and respond, as the literature was coming through. And this group of about 10 motley people from different areas in the system basically was reviewing the literature and trying to figure out how do we use our current knowledge in cytokine release syndrome in cancer to adapt that to help our patients with COVID-19, severe COVID-19 infection. About 2 weeks after that, and this is basically what you see with the cytokine release syndrome, this enormous, widespread infiltrates, which basically the capillaries of the lungs just leak out. And at this point, it's a very uphill struggle to get a patient off a ventilator and to do much. So we need to get and clamp down the immune response before you get to this stage. And 2 weeks after we started meeting regularly, actually daily, the Society for Immunotherapy in Cancer released a statement saying that COVID-19, a lot of the consequences is because of the cytokine release syndrome. And we actually began to work even more frequently now, trying to figure out not only what are the current treatments available, but are there ways in which we can bring research to bear on this issue. Because we met every day, and literally every day, and we adapt and change, and this is a live document, this was the latest I think in mid-April, we came up with this really complicated, you're not supposed to know what's in this, but this is a live document. Everything that sometimes is new is updated bi-weekly, sometimes even daily, as new management comes in. For example, do you use steroids, do you not use steroids? We live in a collective village here, and what has really, really humbled me was how everybody, ranging from nephrologists to infectious diseases, to hematologists that have nothing to do with infectious disease, to all the doctors in the system in all our 8 hospitals, have actually chosen to look at an algorithm that a working group has put together and is now live in all 8 hospitals, being updated almost on a daily basis. Based on what we've now learned in severe COVID-19 patients, what we're now doing next is moving this same algorithm to earlier stage patients with research. Things like IL-6, can we target some of these soluble factors that are being released when our body goes into overdrive? And we have research that's coming down with either mesenchymal stem cells, monoclonal antibodies against GM-CSF, and a whole host of new treatments that we can actually intervene to prevent patients from going into the storm. And again, I'm extremely humbled. We are a very small part of this team, and obviously the frontliners do the most of it. But I think that we're in a very unique situation in Houston Methodist because we have worked as a cohesive whole in a multidisciplinary way to bring different disciplines together in a system of 8 hospitals. And again, it shows great leadership, which I'm very humbled to be part of.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. That was really fascinating and inspiring. And I've also experienced the phenomenon that you referred to of people from all different departments, all different kinds of people, all different skill sets and knowledge bases coming together to try to attack this terrible, terrible problem, and not worrying about who's going to get the credit or whose name is going to go first or any of those kinds of things. Just really focusing on how do we help these patients.
Yeah.
And the kind of team that you were able to bring together is something that you could only bring together in an academic medical center like Houston Methodist. Same comment, you don't have a department of pathology and genomic medicine like the one that Dr. Musser leads anywhere but an academic medical center like Houston Methodist. And now I'd like to ask Jim to tell us a little bit about the plasma treatment and testing and some of those things that his department is leading the way on.
Thanks very much, Dr. Sossman. I'm going to touch on 3 areas, as Dr. Sossman mentioned. I notice we're running a little long here, so I will touch on each of the 3 areas very briefly. The first is the molecular testing arena. The second will be the use of convalescent plasma to give to patients. And then the third, which is just beginning to get underway, will be the serologic or the antibody testing that we're starting to get up and running in the laboratory. So the first area really is molecular testing, molecular diagnostics. We first brought up our molecular test for SARS-CoV-2 virus very early in January as a consequence of learning from colleagues of mine in the Nordic countries that they already had cases there. And at that time, I really thought that there was no way that Houston, Texas was going to avoid getting this virus. So we rapidly validated the test. We had it ready to go by mid-January. As I mentioned, we're also now doing plasma therapy for Houston Methodist patients. And then the third area is the antibody testing of healthcare workers, patients, and residents in and around Houston. And so this is a highly integrated strategy that we're using to really address this really nasty virus that you've heard so much about, unfortunately, for the past month and a half, 2 months. So convalescent plasma therapy, it's really a fancy name for giving a patient the fluid part of blood that contains antibodies that kill the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The concept is well over 100 years old. It was used first to treat diphtheria patients, and for that, Dr. von Behring was awarded the Nobel Prize. Now, for the COVID-19 patients, if they have recovered, we then obtain their plasma, which contains their antibodies, and then working with Dr. Massoud and other colleagues up on the floors, we then transfuse it into very sick patients. And I have to stress that this is very much of a very large team effort. From the pathology standpoint, it's led by my younger colleague, Dr. Eric Salazar, who's an extremely talented blood bank faculty member. We were the first hospital in the United States to give patients this innovative treatment, stressing what Dr. Sossman and Dr. Boom has said, this is only possible in an academic health science center like we have here. Thus far, and I made this slide late yesterday afternoon, thus far we've now done 30 patients and probably will do 2 or 3 more today treating with this convalescent plasma. As Dr. Sossman noted, it's safe. I stress that it's still experimental. We don't know, we don't have the final word on whether it is the definitive treatment for these patients, but we're cautiously optimistic based on patients doing better and in fact some being discharged to home. But I stress that there's much, much more to be done in this arena. The second area that I'll talk about is the extremely complicated area of antibody testing or serologic testing. Our hope is that the presence of antibody against the SARS-CoV-2 virus means that we are immune to it. However, and I stress this, we don't know that. And by we, I mean the healthcare community. We don't know exactly what having antibody against this virus means. Sometimes with other pathogens, it means that we're immune. Sometimes it doesn't. It just depends upon the pathogen. Regardless, we desperately need in the community here a high throughput strategy to determine the precise antibody levels in well over 100,000 people. We're beginning to do a strategy, put this into play, that involves robotics, collaboration, and informatics. Our collaboration is an outstanding collaboration with a group that's Austin-based. It's part of the U.S. Army Futures Command and also UT, University of Texas faculty members. Our goal is to test antibody titers in healthcare workers, in patients, and Houston citizens from all walks of life and all neighborhoods. And please stay tuned. There's much more to come in this arena. So, importantly, we need to understand precisely who is and who is not at risk of catching COVID-19 disease. We really need to significantly expand our molecular and antibody testing. All of you know that, and you've heard daily, that there are many external supply chain problems associated with both molecular testing and antibody testing. Here at Methodist, our internal supply chain has been perfect. It's the external supply chain that's been a problem. We desperately need proven curative therapies. We're really flying blind right now, as Dr. Masood and his colleagues know. We really need a recipe for the secret sauce here. And obviously, we need an effective vaccine. I think realistically, some people estimate that it's 18 to 24 months until large-scale deployment of an effective vaccine is done. Importantly, in an academic health science center like we have here, physician scientists are really uniquely poised. We're uniquely able to address and solve some of these COVID-19 problems. Just a thanks slide. Thank you so much to the Infectious Diseases Research Challenge Initiative, its visionary leaders, and all of our very, very, very generous donors. We have extraordinarily dedicated technologists in the Methodist Molecular Diagnostic Lab. I mentioned our great collaboration with Dr. Masood and his outstanding team. Importantly, our 60, now over 70 plasma donors thus far. These individuals are heroes. They are heroes. And then I also mentioned our collaborators with the U.S. Army Futures Command and UT Austin. And of course, many, many thanks to Drs. Boom, Sossman, Phillips, and Schwartz for their tremendous support in this very difficult time here in our country. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Musser. That was really fascinating, and it just shows the complexity of what needs to be done to start getting our hands around this problem, understanding the dimensions of it, and beginning to control it. So we'll have a brief video now, and then Dr. Boom will come back and join me, and we'll field some questions. I do want to ask the studio staff to be sure to give Dr. Boom the best camera angles because he is my boss. The video will be presented by the Houston Methodist Singers, great folks from the Houston Methodist Center for Performing Arts Medicine. So we'll cut to the video now, and then Dr. Boom will join me for question and answers.
If you ever find yourself stuck in the middle of the sea, I'll sail the world to find you. If you ever find yourself lost in the dark and you can't see, I'll be the light to guide you. Find out what we're made of when we are called to help our friends in need. You can count on me like 1, 2, 3. I'll be there. And I know when I need it, I can count on you. 4, 3, 2, and you'll be there. 'Cause that's what friends are supposed to do, oh yeah. Ooh, yeah, yeah. If you're tossing and you're turning and you just can't fall asleep, I'll sing the song beside you. If you ever forget how much you really mean to me, every day I will remind you. Find out what we're made of when we are called to help our friends in need. You can count on me like 1, 2, 3. I'll be there. And I know when I need it, I can count on you like 4, 3, 2, and you'll be there. 'Cause that's what friends are supposed to do, oh yeah. Ooh, yeah, yeah. You can count on me 'cause I can count on you.
Well, welcome back, everybody. It's good to see everybody. We've spent the last 3 minutes making sure that I got the best camera angle, as Derek said. I'll get him back for that one. But we're going to move on now to some of your questions. We're going to do our best to answer as many as possible, but also sensitive to your time. Want to make sure that we end about 11 o'clock. So the first question we've received is, in what ways is Methodist collaborating with sister institutions in the medical center in the COVID-19 research and response? I'll tackle that. And that we are collaborating very actively. In fact, I'd say it's the best collaboration in 23 years I've ever seen across the Texas Medical Center, and I know all of my colleagues would agree. Every morning I start my day at 7 a.m. and it's usually almost an hour of a virtual meeting with the major institution CEOs within the Texas Medical Center. Roberta Schwartz is on an operational call every single day. So we've been really working hard to coordinate our responses. We're also coordinating on a lot of research activities when we've talked about surveillance testing of our staff, when we've talked about the plasma therapy that you heard about from Dr. Musser. Lots of dialogue, lots of cooperation. We share data on PPE. We've shared PPE. Actually, Texas Children stepped in and helped us with a few days' supply of some gowns that we were a little challenged with, and then we return those back as we get more in. We've done testing for Harris Health. We've done testing for a couple of the other institutions along the way early on. So lots of really great collaboration. It's been really fantastic to see. So next question is, when will some of our hospitals return to performing elective procedures? And that's a really wonderful question. So there's 3 reasons we stopped doing elective procedures. The first of those reasons was safety. And, you know, of course, always that's first, second, third, fourth, fifth. It is the most important thing, and that's safety of our patients and safety of our staff. And as a pandemic starts, that's one of the things, particularly as we don't understand the dynamics and are starting to put in place all the procedures. The second was to conserve PPE, because many of those procedures require a lot of personal protective equipment, and we were at a mode, obviously, nationally and internationally, where we knew that we couldn't use PPE in situations where we shouldn't be using PPE. And the third was to free up hospital capacity, and we were, you know, wildly successful at that, in that, you know, we've have much fewer patients in aggregate in our hospitals right now than we would normally, but of course have a very large number of patients suffering with COVID and employees on the front lines taking care of them. The good news now, as we come towards the peak and then start come down the peak, we've learned a lot about then how things are. First off, we know the hospital capacity is going to be there, short of some second peak, as long as we all community-wide do the right things. We've got a lot of patients with heart disease, with cancer, with, you know, real illnesses, and when they've truly needed care, we're getting it to them. But there's a lot of people where we've not gotten all the care to them because we're postponing it. And while that may work for a week or 2 or 3 or 4, or now we're about 5 weeks out, there's a time where many of those people obviously need to start getting their care. So you'll probably see us piloting some procedures, some testing, for example. Next week, we know we can do that very safely. We've been doing it very safely right now for people who truly need it, you know, urgently and emergently. And you'll see, we would expect towards the end of next week or the week thereafter, we'll probably start doing some of the more urgent and elective procedures. Will be done very thoughtfully. It will be done very gradually, completely with safety in mind as we sort that out. I don't know the timing exactly. Quite frankly, we're waiting to see what the governor says today in terms of some statewide orders that will obviously impact that as well. And first and foremost, everything we do will be done safely. The third question, and I'll get this one too, and then we'll start moving some for Dirk, but how has our academic institutional partners at Weill Cornell and New York Presbyterian, have we interacted with them? The answer is yes. I've been on the phone several times with leaders there, and as have many other leaders across the institution. And quite frankly, we've collaborated with many other institutions around the country as well. I'm on a phone call every week that actually I'm the facilitator for something called the Leadership Institute with 25 or 30 large system CEOs from all around the country comparing notes. And so the collaboration really nationally with all of our partners and many others has been really fantastic. So with that, Dirk, why don't you take the next question?
Sure. The next question is, can you please explain exactly what virtual ICU means? It's a great question and doesn't have anything to do with video games. You know, the thing is that when a patient is in the intensive care unit, they need to be monitored very, very carefully. And the conventional way of doing that has been with blood pressure monitoring, oxygen saturation monitoring, EKG monitoring, and so forth. That is great, but there's a lot to be said for the pattern recognition abilities of the human brain. And just how a patient looks can be terribly important. So Roberta Schwartz, the chief executive of the Academic Medical Center Hospital here, has been working for quite a while in collaboration with Dr. Massoud on how can you roll this out to the community hospitals, and it's proven to be really literally a lifesaver in this viral pandemic. So let me ask Dr. Massoud to give us a few words on how the virtual ICU works and what his experience with it has been.
Thank you, Dr. Sussman. So virtual ICU really means that you're providing critical care to more than one areas and more than one patient, because on bedside you have one nurse or one doctor. This virtual ICU is collecting data from all the monitors. We have cameras in which you can actually look at the pupil size. And all of this data is going to an algorithm which is stratifying the complexity of the patient. It alerts the critical care team, which is in a very technological hub, and they are monitoring a lot of patients with the virtual nurses and physicians who are actually monitoring. Virtual is a word because they're always monitoring, they're always evaluating, and they interact with the bedside team so they can manage the patient along with the bedside team. And this way, with all the algorithms, all the predictive modeling, we pick up early problem, we interact with the bedside team and integrate and develop care. In this COVID environment, what the virtual ICU is able to do is minimize the in and out of the bedside team. They pick a problem, they treat it, and they can help the bedside team to have less PPE utilization. So world-class care in multiple forms. As Dr. Sussman mentioned, and not only in the main campus, we are expanding in our community hospitals, so we will be an extra layer of protection, extra layer of critical care being provided on top of bedside team. So this will allow us to be a leading institution in the country. We, as I mentioned, we started in limited form. We are now a lot more, and we'll be expanding that. So I hope this helps and to help answer this question.
Thank you very much, Faisal. That's great. I'll take the next two questions, and then I'll turn it back over to Mark. One question that comes up a lot and has been asked here is what drugs, such as hydroxychloroquine, have been used in the treatment of patients, and what have been the results? The most scientifically valid answer to that question is we really don't know what the results are so far. Hydroxychloroquine is one that has been used a lot. It's an FDA-approved drug that is used for malaria. It's also used for some autoimmune disorders such as lupus. A lot of doctors are prescribing it quote-unquote off-label, which means it's not an approved use for the drug, but they're prescribing an FDA-approved medication. There are some studies that suggest that this drug will help to reduce the severity of the disease. There are others that show no effect. You do have to be aware that the drug has, like all medications, some side effects and toxicities. And that's the reason why we and many other centers are launching research studies to try to answer this question in a controlled way. The other medication that you probably have heard a lot about in the last few days is remdesivir. This is an antiviral which interferes with the replication of the virus's RNA and therefore interrupts its life cycle and prevents it from reproducing. There is a big study of remdesivir going on, sponsored by the manufacturer. The NIH also has stood up a study. The results are not yet in. Kind of anecdotal impressions from the clinical staff are that it may be helpful. This is way too early to start getting excited about. It's, I would say, more like a glimmer of hope that we hope will turn into something real when the study results are released. Another question was on the consequences for the heart and the brain of the COVID-19, and whether there will be any long-term effects. I think this is in the other direction. Well, let me take one about virus and blood type. A question came up about, are there any studies about showing that blood type A is a higher risk? There is some preliminary data suggesting for Rh positive patients that type A is a little bit more prevalent in COVID-19 patients than type O. We don't really know what that means, but certainly the genetic makeup of the person who gets infected is clearly tremendously important in how this disease plays out in an individual person. Because, as you know, some people don't even know they have it. Some people have a mild flu. Some people have a severe flu, and obviously some people sadly pass away. One more question, I think, on, if you scroll up near the top, there's a question on the long-term consequences. Keep going. Here you go. What are your thoughts about potential brain and heart damage for COVID patients? And I do want to focus on one other aspect of our academic medical center, and that's our Center for Outcomes Research. If we're really going to understand this disease, and if we're going to be able to combat and prevent similar diseases in the future, as per Dr. Boom's plan, we really need to understand more about how this spreads through the population and what its long-term effects really are. The SARS-CoV-2 virus is a close relative of the SARS-CoV-1 virus that created the SARS epidemic in China a number of years ago. We're now learning that people who were infected with that virus have a significantly higher risk of heart disease, high blood pressure, metabolic abnormalities, hypercholesterolemia, and so forth. We need to understand whether this is going to happen in the SARS-CoV-2 epidemic, because if that is the case, it's going to be a big public health problem, because we're going to have a lot of people with long-term consequences. So our Center for Outcomes Research is already setting up a database to study this question and give us a scientifically valid answer as soon as possible. I'd give Dr. Masood another turn at the microphone to talk about the acute cardiovascular consequences.
Thank you, Dr. Sossman. So what we're seeing is that in about 20% of patients do have some significant heart injury in this patient population. And if you add the comorbidities that Dr. Sossman mentioned, like diabetic, hypertension, obesity, and if you're elderly, that puts a lot more burden on your heart. So they have a higher incidence of heart injury, and the short-term impact is impacting their outcomes, that means recovery. Long-term, as you mentioned, Dr. Sassman mentioned, we'll have to all find out. On brain-wide also, not as much as the heart, but I think this is still new, and we will learn a lot more through the Outcomes Research Institute.
Thank you, Faisal.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a couple other questions. If y'all would scroll up towards the top of the list, I saw a couple there I want to cover. I'll take the second on the list now, but the singers that you had a chance to see, they really represent the diversity and Houston Methodist and the human side of medicine. And are these our employees? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. They do a beautiful job. It's part of our Center for Performing Arts Medicine. And we're very proud of them for the great job they do. Another question right below that is, what does reopening our economy look like? And what's the possibility of large gatherings in the month of May and June? This is, of course, the multi-trillion-dollar question that faces all of us. Let me give you a couple of my thoughts. One is tying back to those reopening criteria. We really have to be well down the curve before we significantly change any behaviors in the community. Why is that? If you think about the day that we put restrictions in place, that was a day where there was actually very little disease in Houston, which is why we've done so well versus New York and some other places. If we're on the curve but still at a pretty high level, we'll have more disease in the community at that point. And if we go willy-nilly, we will have a second peak that's far worse. And there was another question, I'm not going to go pull it up, but it was about the pros and cons and the economic benefits and economic, obviously damages that are happening. And the reality is we'll have far worse economic damage if we allow that to happen. We have to be patient. We have to get farther down the curve. I don't think it's that far out. And then thoughtfully and incrementally release some of the restrictions. In terms of large gatherings, I don't think we're going to see large gatherings for a long time. Certainly not in the month of May. When we talk about May, you're going to start seeing more businesses be able to go back to work. You're going to see physical distancing that's required, significant hygienic practices that need to be ramped up, people wearing masks in public, a lot of hot spotting for the public health department to figure out who has the disease and how to manage that and how to handle that. A lot of work from employers checking temperatures, following quickly with their employees who might have illness. It's going to be very complicated. It's going to be very disruptive. It's not going to be anywhere near normal in May, but it's going to start to creep in that direction. And I honestly don't know exactly when it gets there. The most important thing will be that we don't allow that big second curve to happen, because it'll be far worse, and that will be devastating, frankly. Health-wise, it'll be devastating for the economy. So with that, I want to go to one last question. I think it was towards the bottom of the thread there, and it was a lovely question, which is, how can we help? How can people help Houston Methodist? And I want to bring things to a close on that lovely thought, because as I said at the beginning, we are so deeply appreciative to everybody for the incredible support that they have provided. And I mean support in every single way. The prayers that we have felt from everybody and from the faith community, and as I speak on a regular phone call with faith leaders across Houston and with our bishop and others within the United Methodist Church, the donations of food and the people putting signs out and just the videos and everything out there to thank our staff, they mean a lot to people who are really making huge personal sacrifice right now. But also, as you see, there's a lot of exciting research going on right now. And people reach out to us to start catalyzing that, and we are so incredibly grateful that they did so. And I just need to thank John and Ann Bookout for really the vision of starting an infectious disease research fund, rapidly followed by David and Diane Modisette and by the Gerald B. Katz Foundation, who created a $1 million matching fund that rapidly filled up. So we raised over $2 million to support all these things and many others that you're hearing about today. And I'm thrilled to say that this week, a number of people have stepped up to create a second matching fund. David and Diane Modisette again stepped up so generously to provide part of the matching. Freeport LNG and their CEO, Michael Smith, he and I talked 2 days ago, and they dedicated $500,000 to that effort. We also have another anonymous donor, so we now have another $1 million matching fund to support these great research projects. So thank you from the bottom of our heart. If you're interested, of course, we'd be happy to speak with you. It is propelling, life-changing research that hopefully can change the course of this disease and certainly can inform the scientific knowledge and hopefully cure people and save people's lives. I want to say also that, as I mentioned at the beginning, we've gotten an outpouring of other kinds of support, and we are so grateful for that. I mean, literally thousands and thousands of meals have been delivered to frontline staff across Houston Methodist, donated by wonderful Houstonians. A number of charities have popped up, a number of specific restaurants have done that, and we are so grateful for that. We are also in the process right now of bringing up a frontline employee relief fund and recognition fund. So if there's any interest in that, we'd love to have people participating in that as well. Right now, frankly, from a financial perspective, our focus has been keeping our people employed, keeping our people paid. Obviously, we have people from the front lines to people who are sitting at home right now in our labor pool, perhaps not having the hours they would normally have, and we've been backstopping them, and really through the end of May, our employees will not feel a downturn, which is something we're very proud to be able to do. And so your support in helping recognize those frontline staff is greatly appreciated. And so from the bottom of all of our hearts, I hope you found today educational, interesting. We'll continue to communicate as much as possible. Send us more questions. We'll get you answers. We'll send out some of the slides. I know we had a couple minor technical issues with some slides today. We'll get you clean versions of all of those so you'll have those. And God bless each of you, and stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you.